Everyone, this presentation will be on snake bite, the clinical features as well as the management along with the first aid. Now, snake bite was initially thought to be a problem predominantly of rural areas, but in recent times reports have been there where snakes have bitten children in the hospital, at home, where it does become a problem of public health importance, wherein first aid becomes all the more important in saving the life of the child. During this presentation, I will talk in terms of the medically important snakes, the poisonous snakes in India, a bit about the snake venom, about the clinical features of different envenomations, about the antivenom as well as the management of snake bite including the first aid before summarizing. Now, medically important snakes, if you see from a herpetologist point of view, are 5 predominant families of Colubridae, which include the boomslang and bird snakes, Atractospilidae, which includes the natal black snakes. However, these are not seen in India. If you consider family Elapidae, you have the cobras, the mamba, the krait and the coral snake, of which cobras and kraits are seen. Viperidae family, which have pit viper and Russell's viper, again both are seen in India, and sea snake of Hydrophilidae family. Now within India, there are 4 poisonous snakes specifically seen: the king cobra, the Russell's viper, saw scale viper and sea krait. Now in the cobra family, you can also add the spectacle cobra as well as the monocle cobra as well. So these are the 4 predominantly poisonous snakes which are seen in India. And just for completion's sake, to be able to identify, the king cobra characteristically seen with its hood, the Russell's viper with a diamond shaped head along with the specific diamond shaped pattern, the saw scale viper which resembles the Russell's viper in appearance but is considerably smaller, and the sea krait, which is predominantly seen in the Andaman and Nicobar Island region. Now coming to snake venom, we can classify predominantly into 3 types. One is the neurotoxic venom, which acts by affecting the CNS, hemotoxic venom, which acts acting upon the bloodstream, affecting the coagulation pathway, and myotoxic venom, which directly acts upon the muscles. The neurotoxic venom is characteristically seen in that of cobra, hemotoxic venom in vipers, and myotoxic venom in sea snakes. Now, if you consider about the lethal dose and certain concepts such as venom yield per bite, it is important to understand that the minimum venom yield per bite is seen in sea krait among the 4 poisonous snakes. So sea krait does give the minimum venom yield per bite, but accordingly the lethal dose for man is also predominantly less. And out of all of these, the krait has the minimum lethal dose for man. So a krait bite does become more dangerous comparatively. However, all the 4 are dangerous as such. Now another important term which we should understand is called dry bite, and dry bite is a self-defense mechanism of the snake wherein the snake attempts to protect itself by biting, and these bites will not always give out a venom yield. But that doesn't mean that a snake bite can be neglected, it is to be taken seriously. So for theory's sake, we will know that a cobra yields 0.2 gram of venom per bite and the lethal dose is 0.12 gram, and this is neutralized by 0.6 grams of 1 ml of antivenom. A krait gives 0.022 grams of venom per bite and the lethal dose for man is 60 milligram. A Russell's viper gives 0.15 gram per bite and that is itself the lethal dose for man. Now, if you do consider the mode of action of venom as such, it's because of the zinc metalloproteinase hemorrhagin, which acts upon either the vascular endothelium or on phospholipase A2 or on the polypeptide toxins. Now, if we come to the clinical features, we will classify it as local and systemic. Local findings include presence of fang mark, which will characteristically be seen at the site of the bite, pain, local bleeding, bruising, lymphanginitis, as well as an abscess formation if it is a non-poisonous snake and it is left as such. So abscess formation of course will take 2 to 3 days, but apart from that it is more or less the common for poisonous as well as non-poisonous snakes. Now other general features include fever, headache, myalgia. Fever of course can be because of a secondary infection, but it's a systemic causes and systemic clinical features which I would like to stress upon. The CVS manifestations of arrhythmia, cardiac asystole and shock are very typical and must always be looked for. Gastrointestinal manifestations such as nausea, vomiting, colicky pain are essential, and sometimes that is the only presentation which can come along with the bite mark. So CVS and GIT manifestations are sometimes vague and doesn't really give much clue. But the next two, that is hematological as well as neurological manifestations, will more or less give a strong suspicion towards snake bite. So if the hematological system is affected and there is a characteristic change in the bloodstream, it will definitely typically present as DIC with melena hematemesis or bleeding from the bite site which is uncontrolled or bleeding diathesis. And investigations will be grossly altered, which I will come to in subsequent slides. Neurological manifestations of numbness, tingling around the mouth, drowsiness, ptosis, strabismus, sudden onset motor weakness and seizures without a typical explanation for it. All of these go towards a neurological manifestation of a neurotoxic envenomation. Now, as an extension of these, if we go into the renal system, it can present as acute tubular necrosis with glomerulonephritis as well as acute cortical necrosis as well. And respiratory manifestations such as sudden onset pulmonary edema and respiratory failure, rarely even presenting as ARDS. All of these are respiratory manifestations with musculoskeletal manifestations of generalized pain, stiffness and muscle tenderness in mild cases. Now, a unique feature which is seen with the spitting cobra is ophthalmic manifestation of blurring of vision, conjunctival spasm, eyelid swelling, photophobia and corneal ulceration, because unlike other snakes, it splays its venom, it does not bite. So the spitting cobra will end up splaying the venom. So if the eyes are affected, it will end up with the manifestation as such. Now, in the management, I'm first focusing on the first aid, because first aid is the most crucial thing to be done if encountered in a field setting, and the mnemonic to recollect this is called as RIGHT. The R stands for reassuring the patient, I stands for immobilize the same way as you would immobilize a fracture, GH stands for get to a hospital. And in rural areas or in semi-urban areas where all hospitals are not well equipped, you can also take it as get to the nearest government hospital. And T standing for tell any symptoms that manifest and initiate treatment. So there are two aspects in T. Now, reassuring the patient is important because post a snake bite, the panic itself can result in an arrhythmia, which can itself prove to be more fatal than a dry bite or the bite of a non-poisonous snake. The idea behind immobilization is to ensure that the venom, even if present, does not spread too much. Get to the hospital, of course, is self-explanatory to ensure that the complete treatment is given, and telling any symptom that might manifest to give a clue as to what sort of envenomation you are dealing with, and of course initiating treatment is self-explanatory. Now, I'll tell about this pressure immobilization method a little bit more in detail, and it's a reliable technique to prevent the venom flow into the system. So, diagrammatically we'll go. We can see that the person is brought with fang marks. So generally apply a broad pressure bandage from below upwards and over the bite site as soon as possible. And it is important not to remove the trousers, because the movement of doing so itself will allow the venom to enter the bloodstream and keep the bitten leg still. Subsequently, the bandage should be applied as tight as possible, the way we do for a sprained ankle, and all unnecessary movements to be completely curtailed. And to extend the bandage as high as possible, preferably the dictum is 1 joint above for adults, maybe even 2 joints above for children if they do have a tendency for moving. Those studies have not proven that definitely. Continuing on with that, applying a splint to the leg and immobilizing the joints on either side of the bite and binding it firmly to as much of the leg as possible and restricting walking movements. And if any bite on the hand or forearm, a bind to the elbow and using the sling as shown in the diagram. So that somewhat explains about the pressure immobilization technique. So after first aid, if the child is brought into the hospital, the immediate management, of course, as in any emergency, will remain in the form of a triangle and further on as a pentagon. So the initial ABC will go on as usual, airway, breathing and circulation to be maintained, and further extension of that into the D and D, disability and exposure also to be minimum and identified. So after assessing and maintaining the airway, initiating 100% oxygen if respiratory signs are present, respiratory support as adequately indicated for that case, and securing an IV line starting fluids is essential, but it is also important to ensure that the pressure immobilization bandage is not kept in place for a long time, because it is only a first aid and is not a definitive treatment. Now, case of snake bite is almost always to be admitted under an ICU setup. A strong PICU setup is required, and airway and breathing to be maintained to ensure the patient is intubated if required, and commencing positive pressure ventilation for unstable airways and avoiding hypoventilation. As far as possible, elective early intubation is advisable if the child is unstable. This is a dictum which goes a long way in ensuring that the child survives. And coming to circulation aspect, if circulatory failure is suspected, always treat shock with isotonic fluids, and this is one of those cases where a central line is completely avoided because of coagulopathy. So the central line itself can be a source of inducing more blood loss and not able to achieve hemostasis. Now, while in the PICU setup, it is important to observe for the onset and progression of the muscle weakness, monitoring the urine output to ensure that the child does not go in for an AKI, that is acute kidney injury, to avoid it doesn't happen, assessment of the respiratory function, and ensuring that the tetanus immunization is maintained up to date. One pathognomic investigation what is done is called the 20-minute whole blood clotting test, where 2 ml of freshly drawn venous sample blood is kept in a glass vessel and is left undisturbed for full 20 minutes. The tip of the tube is tilted towards one side once and is observed whether the blood is still liquid, that is unclotted and runs out, and if that is there, then it is definitely suggestive of hypofibrogenemia. This term is very essential, and if doubtful, and if at all doubtful, it is always advisable to repeat the test, and always advisable to keep the blood of any of the relative as a control. Now, definitive investigations to be done in a case of snake bite include hematocrit, because there will be a transient hemoconcentration, platelet counts are decreased in viper bites, and WBC count baseline is always required to maintain whether any secondary infections do occur, and early neutrophilic leukocytosis is evidence of systemic envenomation. A peripheral smear is essential to see the degree of hemolysis by observing the fragmented red cells, and plasma is always observed for a pinkish or brownish discoloration to determine the severity. If you consider the enzymes, aminotransferases are elevated, muscle enzymes are elevated, and all of the electrolytes will be somewhat deranged. Specifically, potassium will be elevated, creatine elevated, urea elevated, blood urea nitrogen elevated. This tetrad, we can call it, all the four together collectively are elevated in acute renal failure secondary to a viper bite. Now, coming to anti-snake venom, it is the only specific antidote which is available, and this antivenom is nothing but immunoglobulins which are refined from the FAB2 fragment of IgG purified from either horse or sheep serum. These horses and sheep are sensitized with snake venom, and the exaggerated immune response triggers immunoglobulins which are later filtered out. Now, one important point to highlight, in the West, the antivenom is available individual. That is, it is separate for a cobra, separate for a viper, it is separate for a Russell's viper, it is separate for a sea krait. But in India, we have only one antivenom which is available, which is polyvalent. And by the term polyvalent, I mean that a single antivenom contains all the components for all the snakes, because it is difficult to identify in a low resource setting what the causative organism is. Now, WHO has put out certain indications for the use of anti-snake venom, initially in 2005, and it has been updated in 2018. I'll first enlist whatever was suggested in 2005 and subsequently tell the changes which have come out recently. The specific indications for 2005 WHO guidelines as per which we give antivenom include hemostatic abnormality or spontaneous bleeding coagulopathy or thrombocytopenia, specific neurotoxic signs like ptosis, ophthalmoplegia and paralysis, hypotension, shock, arrhythmias, oliguria, anuria, or abnormally rising creatine and urea, and any other supportive or definitive lab evidence suggesting of a snake bite. On local examination, a local swelling more than half of the bitten limb in the absence of a tourniquet, because of course tourniquet will itself aggravate a swelling. swelling after a bite on the digits, rapid extension of the swelling, or enlarged tender lymph nodes draining the bitten limb. Now, initially it was recommended in the 2005 guidelines to reassess after 3 hours, but 2018 guidelines have reduced this time to 90 minutes. This is a very important point to keep in mind. So reassessment has to be done after 90 minutes. At the same 90 minutes, a 20-minute whole blood clotting test is to be repeated to observe for the change in the time taken to achieve that clotting. And at the same 90 minutes, a repeat dose of anti-snake venom to be given if no improvement. So 3 important decisions are now taken at 90th minute. Now, anti-snake venom can be given as soon as indicated. It is effective in reversing the systemic manifestations very early and late as well, even after several days. And when signs of local envenomation is there, even without systemic envenomation, anti-snake venom is effective only and only if given within the first few hours after the bite. In neonatal resuscitation, we say the first minute is a golden minute. In poisoning, we say the first hour is golden poisoning. It's a golden hour to save. Similarly, here in snake bite, it's always considered as the first 2 hours are always critical, and 2 hours is pretty much all the time that we have. Now, about the storage of the anti-snake venom, the antivenom is to be stored at 0 to 4 degrees centigrade, always and always to be given only IV and no other route. It is to be reconstituted with 10 ml of sterile water, shaken well and rotated until the serum clears. The dosage is 8 to 10 vials for both adults and children, and there is no dosage distinguishing factor. And the dilution, of course, is 1:10. Previously, a test dose for anti-snake venom was recommended to observe for reaction, but recent times there is no test dose given. It is directly given as an IV infusion initially slowly, watch for the reaction, and then gradually increase the rate in geometrical progression. And the ultimate goal is to ensure that the entire dose goes over 15 to 20 minutes. If you consider the anaphylaxis which can occur because of a reaction, it is generally associated with the polyvalent antivenom, and sometimes it can even be temporary. So it is definitely sometimes a temporary fact wherein initially just might appear as an urticaria, itching, tachycardia or restlessness, but it can go even more severe manifestations like breathing difficulty or typical life-threatening anaphylaxis where intubation and ventilation might be required. To manage a severe anaphylaxis, the initially first step to be done is definitely suspending the antivenom. So there is no doubt that that is a cause, so it's to be stopped. Oxygen support is to be continuously given, and a bolus infusion of 60 ml per kg to be given over 15 minutes definitively. Adrenaline injection is to be given every 5 minutes through an IM route of 0.01 milligram per kg, followed by BP monitoring and the use of dopamine if anything suggestive of a circulatory collapse. Hydrocortisone, the role is debatable, but undoubtedly it has a very good role in preventing the reactions which are seen due to anaphylaxis, and salbutamol nebulization is going a long way if it is not so severe as requiring oxygen, but a mild reaction to ensure bronchodilation is achieved. Now, as far as maintaining the systemic toxicity management, neostigmine is very useful in neurotoxic venom specifically, and if coagulopathy is seen because of a viper bite where DIC profile is DIC is rather suspected, the DIC profile including D-dimer is a must. So D-dimer is a very essential component to rule out DIC occurring, and replacement therapy with clotting factors is always and always to be avoided if an active venom is still there, because it is called the fueling fire effect. So what happens is, let's just assume we take it at literature value. We have a fire which is raging and you're adding fuel to that. The fire will only burn further. The hemotoxic venom sustains upon these clotting factors. So if you're replacing the clotting factors with new ones, you're just giving the venom something new to feed upon. Now this algorithm, we'll just go through it from the beginning. This is an overall broad approach to the treatment of the snake bite. Initially we did the first aid management, and then we stabilized the airway, breathing and circulation, then we did the local assessment and then confirmed the snake bite. no signs of local or systemic effects and only mild swelling, observe vitals for 24 to 48 hours and then discharge. If strongly suspecting a hemotoxic envenomation, go for and presence of spontaneous bleeding is there, and the 20-minute whole blood clotting test has also come significant. Give 8 vials of anti-snake venom in normal saline and then observe, monitor again, and then do further symptomatic management. If it is strongly suggestive of a neurotoxic envenomation, again maintain the airway breathing circulation, maintain oxygenation, give the same dosage, but the management will vary here, where we go in for atropine followed by neostigmine and then observing whether it improves or not. If it improves, continue neostigmine. If it doesn't improve, repeat the anti-snake venom and then go for mechanical ventilation or neostigmine repeat accordingly. If signs of PONS are there, by PONS I mean pain, oozing, node lymphadenitis and discoloration along with swelling, then definitely give 8 vials of anti-snake venom, monitor the vitals, repeat all these tests, both tests which are required for hemotoxic as well as neurotoxic, and then go for a broad spectrum antibiotic, accordingly surgical intervention if needed by amputation to save the limb. Now if we just consider a simplified approach towards an unknown snake bite, if we see a neurotoxicity only with only local swelling, you can definitely think it's a cobra. Neurotoxicity only with signs of no local swelling but bitten while on the floor with pain abdomen, you can think in terms of a crate. Purely hemotoxic manifestation is seen in saw scale viper. Hemotoxic manifestation with renal failure seen because of Russell's viper. A Russell's viper bite can also present with neurotoxicity manifestation along with brown color urination along with renal failure manifestation, so we can again think in terms of Russell's viper. Purely a local swelling alone. Now this is a very important point what we need to think. Purely local swelling alone can be because of a non-venomous snake, or it can even be because of a dry bite. So it is that which we need to be cautious, because when the cause is unknown, we always need to think that it is a venomous snake unless proven otherwise. One quick note on a recent advance, a molecule called as varispladib specifically targets the phospholipase A2 in a wide range of snake venoms. This is currently under trials and has hope of replacing the anti-snake venom as an over-the-counter drug itself. But of course, the cost factor will play a major role in how well it comes into the market and depending on how successful the trials are. These are the references based on which you can go for further reading. And with that, I come to the end of the presentation. I thank you all for patiently listening and hope that it was informative to everyone. Thank you.